Hello. Can you all hear me? Ooh, yeah, that's loud. Hey. Hey everyone, I'm Kelly from Make Noise. Thanks so much for being here tonight to get the first take on Qpas. That's how you pronounce it. I know that's going to be a question. We're super excited to be here. We came here all the way from Asheville, North Carolina, where we live up in the mountains in this tiny little town. We actually came into San Diego after like 30 hours of traveling to spend some time with Tom Erb of Soundhack and do a little work down there, and then drove up to Venice yesterday so we could be here with you all tonight. We're super stoked that this many people showed up. A couple things that I want to let you know is, yes, you can pre-order Qpas now. Actually, I think Harry just made the order for Perfect Circuit about 5 minutes ago. And we're going to start shipping these in February, so just in a few weeks, probably around February 12th. But we have our crew right now is back at the shop putting them together and quality controlling them, and they'll start packing them pretty soon, which is super exciting. You all probably know who this person is, but we also back in the shop have a crew of about 15 of us, and everyone who works there is really, really lovely. So they are back there building modules, testing modules, packing them, selling them, demoing them, shipping them, making the videos. Walker released a YouTube video today. Pete and Lewis released some things on social media. If you follow Instagram, that's what they were working on today. And if you don't know who I am, I'm the other owner of Make Noise, and I run the company. So work with all of these lovely people to bring our modules out to you, and feel really lucky to be able to do that, and to do that with my partner Tony here, who is the founder, lead engineer, and designer of Make Noise. So we're gonna have a raffle giveaway at the end, so stick around and you can ask some questions afterward as well. But I'm gonna turn it over to Tony to get started and introduce you to Qpas.
Hello, thank you for coming out to check out the Qpas with us. I'm going to start with a little bit of a story. So some of you may know that I worked for Moog Music for about 3 years, and I calibrated a lot of Voyagers while I was there. I don't have an exact count, but I think it's something around maybe 3,000 or something like that. A lot of them. And I always used headphones while I was calibrating them. And the Voyager, some of you may or may not know this, has a stereo filter in it. And I always liked the way it sounded. It was just enjoyable. And a lot of people don't know that the Voyager had a stereo filter, because most people who use the Voyager are trying to achieve that kind of old school Mini Moog goodness, and the Mini Moog was definitely a monophonic instrument. So that's kind of when I first started thinking about stereo filters, but the Make Noise instrument never really lent itself to stereo for quite some time. And in fact, the Erb Verb was a sort of a way to turn monophonic voices into stereo with its mono input and stereo output. So the stereo filter, the binaural effect of a stereo dual low-pass filter is simple. You have your cutoff, and one side will be at a higher pitch than the other. And that's simple enough, but what really makes it interesting is that since these filters are typically very exponential in response, as at very low cutoff frequencies, the cutoffs will appear to move at a similar velocity. But as you get higher and higher in frequency, the one that's offset a little bit will start to move at a greater velocity, and it'll get brighter faster. And then finally, both will sort of coalesce into a complete brightness. And you can kind of hear that as I sweep this cutoff control. I've got the low pass output patched into the stereo output of my CV bus, and I'm just feeding a square wave from the DPO. So you can kind of hear how they kind of start together, they spread apart, and then as they reach that, they sort of saturate in brightness, they kind of come back together again. And that's with no modulation or anything. Already you're achieving this wonderful effect, especially if you're wearing headphones. It's quite addictive. So I'd heard that quite a bit, and then later I developed, I left Moog and developed the QMMG, and that's where I started thinking about multi-peak filtering. But the QMMG obviously wasn't a dedicated multi-peak filter. It was just a device that happened to have 4 filters in it, and but I did patch quite a bit of multi-peak type filtering with the QMMG. But admittedly, even though there is some normalizations in that module, it's very it's a clunky interface at best to do true multi-peak filtering. I don't know how many people have worked with multi-peak filtering in here. Some of you might already have a few multi-peak filtering modules, but for those of you who don't, multi-peak filtering is most commonly used for something called formants. And formants are those sort of wonderfully vocal type filter sounds. The thing about formants is it requires several filters and also really meticulous programming. I mean, we're talking about something where you have to have exact cutoff frequencies, amplitudes, and Q factors for each of your cores that are creating these vocal-like sounds. I'm going to patch into the bandpass here. I've still got that square wave, and kind of give you some of these, an idea of how some of these can be achieved with the Qpas. But again, the Qpas is not really devoted to formats. It's very primitive vocalizations. Additionally, right now it's in stereo. For this type of operation, it would be better to go mono to mono, which puts all 4 peaks in one channel. So this is a form of multi-peak filter use. These formats. But if you can just sort of stop thinking about formats and stop trying to program these very exact vowel sounds and just modulate until it sounds good, multi-peak filtering can be a lot of fun and quite gorgeous. And so I was thinking about this, and I was also thinking about this sort of stereo spacing, and I thought it would be wonderful if you could have both. If you could have this sort of, the binaural enveloping that stereo-spaced peaks give you, and the animation of 2 or more peaks in a single channel dancing around each other. It's something that's, it's quite, it's a dizzying effect. It's something that once you start doing it, you just want to keep going. A lot of times probably to excess, but you can always dial it back later. So I thought it'd be wonderful to combine these 2 things into one filter. And so this is where the development of the Qpas began. Qpas is short for Quad Peak Animation System. Inside the Qpas, there's 4 identical state variable filters with a control system that's devoted to utilizing them in a stereo multi-peak configuration. And it needed to be powerful enough to make 4 filters useful together, but also simple enough so that rather than dominating the system, it integrated into the system. And what I mean by that is I didn't want to have something that was just 4 filters behind one faceplate, where you would need to patch several different LFOs or several different modulation sources, several different signals, and adjust several different parameters to get the effect. I wanted something that felt like a single module and yet utilized 4 filter cores for the great complexity and beauty that they can bring. And so that's where we set off. And in order to make a quad filter core, first you've got to design a single filter core, because you don't want to put 4 filters on a board and realize that you've done it wrong. So the first step was the probably the hardest, but also the most boring, which was to develop a single channel filter. And it took me about 4 completely different filter cores before I got one that my beta testers were completely happy with. And I do have some very picky beta testers. We call them golden ears around the shop, some of them. They'll hear the tiniest little pin drops in a sound and bring it up to you, which I'm very grateful for. And it's something that we couldn't do what we do without these people. And so we went through, we developed this single peak core. And once we had that, we could start developing a multi-peak core. Now, the filter I was talking about earlier in the Voyager was two filter cores. And I started with 2, and that was pretty fun. But we tried 3, and 3 was also great fun. But for stereo, 3 didn't make as much sense to me, so I went to 4. And it was at 4 that I felt like I really achieved the stereo spacing, but also the animation per ear, I guess you could say, that I was really visualizing, or I guess imagining in my head. And having 4 filters also meant there was a lot of things to control. And so we had to figure out how to make this thing useful to people without having just a whole mass of knobs on there that would be sort of, I guess when I see a lot of different controls, I don't know where to start. And we wanted to make something where you knew where to start as soon as you looked at the module, which is obviously why this knob here is the largest. Because this knob, when you turn it, brings you all of the action. Or so you think, because there's also these knobs here, the radiate left and radiate right. And these knobs here are the way that I kind of came up with to deal with having 4 filters combined into one unit. And so what they do is they each control a pair of these filter cores. So the radiate left controls core 1 and 2, the radiate right controls core 3 and 4. And they offset it from this center frequency, but they also push them away from each other. And so if you only listen to one, which we'll do here, and so that's completely mono, and you're only hearing 2 of these chords. That's radiate left. And then when you bring in the right one, and the right one is pretty similar. But when you combine them, you get that combination of the animation and the stereo spacing. And I'm using only one control voltage here, but if you see down at the bottom here, I've got this arrow that points to the other radiate input. And what happens is this is normal. This radiate left CV input is normal to the radiate right CV input. And then using the attenuverters, you can set them to be scaled and inverted, if you will, to be so that they can be different from each other. So the radiate left I can have set to a lower radiate setting, and the right a higher radiate setting. But then I can invert the radiate right channel, and then they end up kind of moving in the opposite direction of each other, which achieves a very simple but pleasing stereo sound. Now, I could also create a second LFO and patch that and modulate radiate right independently of radiate left. And so in this way, the radiate parameters give you a level of control over the independent cores within the module, while the frequency control is sort of the main control. It links all 4 of the cores together and lets you move all 4 of them simultaneously up or down in cutoff frequency. The Q is also simultaneously controlling all 4 cores. So as I increase the Q, all 4 cores' resonance will increase. But here's the thing, since the cores have very offset, or potentially can have very offset cutoff frequencies, it's not going to seem like all the resonances are coming up to the same amplitude, because we don't really hear resonances like that. What you'll notice is that some of the frequencies will still, some of the cutoffs will still seem louder than others. Some of the peaks will seem louder than others. The other thing that the filter has going for it with the Q is that it's very underdamped at high Q settings, and what that means is that it's prone to oscillations that sort of decay in a very pretty way. And if you patch something like a gate into this, so I've turned the radiate parameters all the way down, so the peaks are very close together. Increase the cutoff frequency, and you'll hear the pitch of that ringing filter also go up in frequency. If I increase the Q, that underdamped element really starts to play, and you'll hear it start to oscillate, but the oscillations die pretty quickly. If I adjust the radiates, I can have multiple oscillations at different frequencies. And I'm going to move to the high pass to give you another example of something that makes that underdamped quality really fun. So I have in here, in my morphogene, a very simple drum loop. And I'm going to play for you what it sounds like coming straight out of the morphogene. I take that same drum loop and I patch it into the mono input and take the high pass output, also in mono, which again combines all 4 of those cores together. Hear how the filter is ringing. It's excited by the input signal, and the input signal being very percussive, gives time, it gives space for the filter to sort of ring out beneath it. Now I have the CV out from the morphogene, which is an envelope follower. So it's a control voltage that's changing based on the amplitude of the signal that it's playing back. And I'm going to patch that into my Q CV in. And what that's going to do is it's going to boost that Q momentarily when a loud sound comes in, and it's going to excite that filter momentarily. But then as the sound gets quieter, the filter too will also it'll have less resonance. So it has almost like a compressive effect to it. Now take this, and I'm going to patch a channel of the Rene, which is being driven by, well, oddly enough, that same CV out. So basically every time a drum hit happens, it's advancing a channel. I'll put it on the red here so you can see it. It's advancing to another step. You can kind of see that. Actually, you can't really. Well, yeah, you can kind of see it right down there. I'm going to patch that into the right radiate. And what that's going to do is it's going to be sequencing that right radiate. But remember, I've got it in mono here, so really we're just talking about sequencing two of the four cores. The filter's almost, it's playing a melody that's excited by the drum loop that's coming from the morphogene. And I honestly, folks, I just kind of set some random pitches as you all were walking in here. Obviously, if you're a true musician, you could sculpt a wonderful melody from that. So to take it further, you could use something like a VCO to modulate, or actually, it might be more fun to try this random voltage to modulate this frequency here, center frequency. Frequency modulation. And again, a lot of that character is just coming from the fact that the filter, when you set the Q, I know it looks like we're not above 12 o'clock here, but we are because we're driving it with this sequencer here. When you set the Q above 12 o'clock, the filter becomes highly undamped and it's prone to ringing, which I think is a great thing and you can put to a lot of good use. Now, it never actually oscillates. And the reason for that is exactly for these sorts of patches, where you have this sort of controlled ringing that you can sculpt. If the filter broke into oscillation, what you would end up with is very loud sine waves that sort of covered up the signal that you're patching into it. It's a little less useful. I mean, there's some great filters out there that self-oscillate, and you can use them as sine wave oscillators. This filter doesn't do that by design, exactly for this purpose here that you've just listened to. So the other thing that we put in here is a stereo VCA at the input. And the VCA is pre-filter. Now I know that the classic place to put a filter, to put a VCA is after the filter. As Dr. Moog taught us, the VCA comes after the filter. But for some reason we put it before the filter. We didn't read that part of the synthesizer manual. and we ended up putting it before the filter. We'd already run, several hundred of these PCBs when this was pointed out to me. And so I said, let's just run with it, and we'll sell it as a feature. But it can be a feature, in all honesty. And the reason I say that is sort of related to what we were just talking about with this high-pass filter. Because the filter is highly underdamped when you have the Q turned up, and it's prone to that ringing, if you're controlling the amplitude of the signal going into the filter, it leaves space for the filter to sort of sing. When your VCA closes and that input signal is no longer there, it leaves room for the filter to shine. And so that's the real reason why it is there. And I have a patch I can put together here to exemplify that to some degree and to show you how the VCA works. The VCA is, of course, stereo. There's a single input in keeping with our goal of simplifying the processes. It's a stereo VCA. Typically, you want both channels to increase or decrease in volume simultaneously. And so that's what happens here. Now, something I haven't really told you about is that there's a lot of normalizations that ease the transition from mono to stereo, from stereo to mono as well, which is highly useful. For example, the verb has only a single input. It's a mono in, stereo out device. You have a stereo signal in a patch, such as the stereo output of a morphogene. That can go in to the Qpas in stereo, and then you can select low pass, band pass, or high pass, or smile pass outputs, patch a mono, just one of these jacks, to the verb, and then you have your stereo to mono conversion. And it actually is highly useful in that way. We're going to be using it for mono to stereo. So I'm taking just a single input of a square wave, and I'm using the low pass output. And I had another sequence programmed on this Renee on the Y channel. And I'm going to use, sorry, I broke my patch down just a little bit while I was showing you some other things. Okay. There we go. Pretty lunk-headed sequence there, just kind of mashing you in the forehead. And right now all I'm doing is, I'm going to get rid of that patch too. I've got a little bit of resonance, but actually before I get into that, I did want to show you one other thing that's kind of interesting about this filter. So when you have the Q turned all the way down, there's just a tiny little bit of negative resonance, and the reason I put that in is in my experience, most filters, even with resonance turned all the way down, they will have a tiny little bit of resonant peak there. And being a person that's made quite a few low-pass gates in their lifetime, I've grown very fond of highly non-resonant filters. And so with the Q turned all the way down, you end up with this. Well, I'll just play it for you. You end up with something that's vaguely low-pass gate-ish because there's just no resonance whatsoever. We're going to increase that just a little bit to about 9 o'clock, and it starts sounding a little more like the filters that you're used to with low resonance settings. I know, it's subtle. I tried demonstrating low-pass gates on the NAMM floor for 3 or 4 years, and it was almost impossible to convince people that they were different from VCAs. But then when you go home and you're in your studio, you're like, oh, this is really different. But yeah, it's very subtle. So I've got here, I'm going to put this envelope that I've programmed with maths back into this level control here. And you'll hear how different it sounds. First of all, so I'll set the cutoff kind of so it's pretty wide open. Oh, that's the same envelope shape as we had before. It's just, kind of puckers out like VCAs do. And that's kind of what I was talking about, where low pass gates do sound a little different. This obviously is not a low pass gate. There's no Vactrols in it, but there is something vaguely reminiscent of it when you have that Q turned all the way down. As soon as you increase the Q a little bit, you get more into filter territory, and that's great too, but it's nice to have that option. So I patch this back here, and I'm coming up. I got to close it up soon here so we can get to some questions. I promise it won't take too much longer. So one thing I haven't really talked about much is these mysterious exclamation point inputs, or wildcard inputs as we call them. We are purposely very mysterious about these because we don't want to tell people how to patch them. All of the modules have all these manuals that tell you exactly what each input does, and most of that is well documented in the Qpas manual, which we'll be launching in probably a week or so. But these inputs, we don't tell you a whole lot about them because we want you to patch blindly, so to speak. You could put audio rate, you can put a gate sequence, you can try just about anything in them. You're going to get some different results. They're wired to a lot of different points in the circuit, some of which are not accessible in any other way. So they're useful for doing some things that maybe you can't do with just the CV inputs for radiate, cutoff, or resonance. So if I start here, I have kind of a slow sequence. And you see here I have a clock that's kind of quick. And I'm going to patch that to this one here. This has been a sort of something that I've been interested in ever since I got one of my first really kind of quasi-digital synths. It was in Sonic ESQ1, and there was this patch because this thing was built and programmed before digital delays were very affordable. There was this preset on it that emulated delays, and I always loved that preset because it seemed like you were getting something for free, just with a little bit of clever programming. And so that's sort of what this patch is doing. Because the VCA is opening and closing kind of slowly, and I'm running a clock that's faster than the gate sequence to this tick, 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 tick input here, it ends up making these accents that are vaguely reminiscent of an echo. Now, the clock that's driving this input is synchronized to the clock that's driving the sequencer as well. So that first accent is in time with the sequence. The second and third that you hear, they kind of sound like echoes of the original. Now, there's another one over here that does something that's a little different. We'll take another VCO here and patch it in. I'm going to adjust the radiate parameters so we can get a little bit of spread. And I've got a random voltage that's synchronized again with the sequence running a little bit faster. And I can patch that to the center frequency, the cutoff knob here. And then I'm going to make this the modulation source for this this tick 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 input very fast. I'm going to make it audio rate. You can hear what that sounds like. We can also make this one run at audio rate as well. So this one here is a little more subtle, whereas this one here gets a lot more aggressive. One thing that I like is when you start doing audio rate modulation, it almost has the sound of surpassing like an aliasing filter. It sounds really gritty in that way. And again, all of these parameters are affecting all of these outputs, which are all available simultaneously. That concludes my demonstration. And I figured you all would have lots of questions, or maybe a few. Do we have any questions? One right here.
When running stereo to mono, is there any kind of phase adjustment or code filter going on to prevent
Very responsible question here. Very responsible. When running stereo to mono, do we have to worry about any sort of phase adjustments? So one of the things that filters do is they totally bork phase, right? And there's 4 of them in here. And when you run a stereo signal to mono, the 2 channels are summed but from different filter cores. And by adjusting the radiate parameters, you've really pretty much borked phase anyhow. So it doesn't, in my experience at least, it doesn't seem to be any sort of problem, especially if you're modulating any of the parameters. What you end up with is just kind of an interesting mono version of your sound that you could, for example, use to do parallel processing through further modules that further bork the signal beyond borkitude, and then everything is just totally whacked. Yeah. Any other questions? This guy right here had one, right?
Yeah, so the wildcard
Wildcard
inputs,
inputs.
you imply that they're different? They do different things?
They do.
Just one for radiate,
I know. The way the graphic worked out, it does look like. So his question is the wildcard inputs, these inputs here and here, do they operate on the left and right channel? Those of you with 2 ears and listening probably noticed that it did not seem like they did that. They don't. It just, I couldn't resist sort of drawing the graphic in this way because it looked prettier. They are operating on different combinations of the filter cores, so they do different things. And but I set them up. There was an earlier version, a prototype version, where they were left and right. And my problem with that was that when you patch something into one but not the other, it was like you were like walking sideways, like the old V8 commercial. I don't know if anybody in here would catch that reference, but it really was, you kind of had to have something patched into both. So then we tried normaling these 2 together so that if you patched just to the left, you would get it in both. And it worked. It definitely worked. And then you could do independent things with one ear and the other. But then I thought, well, what would be even greater would be if they just did different things, and it kind of makes them a little more useful. I mean, there's such aggressive inputs you really. I mean, don't get me wrong. There'll be many people that use both of them simultaneously, but I also think there'll be a lot of people that use one or the other because they're kind of different. There's a question way in the back. You have to talk kind of loud for me.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I feel like everyone understands when I say my biggest fear is the day when I run out of space in my case, and you have that problem on a way larger level. So I'm kind of curious to know if that's like affecting your plans, because like this is sort of the tipping point on this system.
Oh, on the shared system. Yeah. This module wouldn't be in the shared system. And yeah, as far as me personally, I really only own a shared system, to be honest with you. If I want to use some of the other modules, I'll borrow a skip from the shop and throw them in there. I kind of think this module here. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to repeat that question. So he's asking, and in a very loud and clear voice, might I add, he's asking if this is a tipping point. You know, how do we fit this module into this system? So in this case, I've removed the Echo phone. But I really feel like the shared system is what it is. I know I keep saying that over the years, and then Kelly will say, well, you said the shared system was this, but now you're wanting to add this Tempe thing. I'm like, oh, well, you know, it was kind of the idea all along that there will be some sort of multi-clock in there, but, you know, I really think that this is the system is finished, but there will be an Echo phone here. This Qpas would almost necessitate a different system. If we were going to do a system, it would have to be kind of built around it. It would have to have more stereo facility, and so, for example, a morphogene would obviously be a good pair to it. In this system, it is kind of great because we got a lot of mono sources that we can turn into stereo, and I didn't really get around to it because I hit my 30-minute mark sooner than I thought. But some of you have probably used an herb verb as a sound source. That's great. You patch this herb verb, which is very bright, into the Qpas for stereo filtering, and it works really well. So there is use for it in this system, but shared system is going to remain shared system. There's someone in the back there. Yeah?
Is there anything stopping you from using the filter outputs as variable multipliers?
Variable multipliers. Multiples. Oh, right. Yeah, no, you could totally do that. They maintain phase loosely for the most part. There's no like 180-degree shifts, so it's pretty safe. And yeah, you can definitely add them together in different ways. I would highly encourage that, for sure. And you know, it does get kind of interesting because there's definitely some, you know, if you were to take, say, just the left bandpass and just the right would be just high pass and start putting those together, I think you could do some pretty great things. You might have to do a little balancing in the mix to make it sit right, but I think it could work. I didn't repeat that question. So that question was, can you use the multiple outputs, simultaneous outputs, as sort of signal multiples, so that, in other words, having one signal coming from several different filters and being combined together in a mixer afterwards, or perhaps being processed in different ways. One goes to a ring mod, one goes to a reverb, one goes to an echo, and then kind of bring them all together. I think that's a great idea. High pass filter into something like an echo always sounds fantastic.
Can you talk about the smile pass?
Smile pass, yeah. Okay, yeah, that was actually in here, and I skipped over it because I was running out of time, but you've given me a new lease on my script here. So smile pass. So what happened was I laid out the whole panel, right? And there was space for 2 more jacks, but obviously, they, you know, synthesizer rule book again dictates that there's low pass, band pass, and high pass. I know there's other filters out there. For example, there's a notch filter that is in some modules, not many, but some, and that's great. But the problem with doing something like a notch is that there's 4. It's a quad core filter, and you have these radiate parameters, so you're always moving the peaks around. That doesn't bode well for doing something like a notch filter. So I started literally just experimenting. I mean, practically circuit bending, just combining different taps from the 4 different cores. And the goal was to create a filter that was maybe a little more subtle, and also a filter that never lost all of the high and low end. So for example, I get back to a something from the morphogene. I have another loop in here. Not that basic drum loop, which I am probably the #1 YouTube player of that basic drum loop. I don't know if that drummer is in the crowd now, but thank you for basic drum loop #2 on YouTube. So when I turn low pass down, obviously I lose a lot of high frequency content. When I turn high pass up, obviously I lose a lot of low frequency energy. So smile pass, with the goal of the smile pass was to create something that maintained high and low frequency energy, but allowed you to animate peaks within those spectral areas. And if we modulate it with something like an LFO, and then I'm going to take another LFO, running a little faster, and patch it to the radiates. By the way, the radiates are already offset in this example, so the right is set higher than the left. I've got Q set kind of high, so it's maybe a little bit dramatic. But as you can see, you never fully lose the low frequency energy or the high frequency energy, thus putting a smile on the faces of musicians all over the world, because everybody loves the bass and everybody loves crispy mixes, so it satisfies in both manners. We have other questions, or this guy here? They will be. They'll be just like this one. Yes. Yeah. People seem to like black panels. Yeah. So silver is the old black. Black is the new black here. So yeah, they will be. So the question was, will the panels be black? They will be just as this. This is a production unit sitting in the case right here. When we left Asheville, we had about 100 units that have been worked through our quality control system. Yes.
I love the stuff. I love your DSP stuff. Are you planning on doing a distortion module?
A distortion module. I don't have. So he's asking if we're planning a distortion module. I don't have one at the moment. Now, the input, I didn't mention this, but since you brought this up, the input is at unity around 2 o'clock. So that's why if you've noticed, I've kept it around there for pretty much the whole demonstration. It is possible to boost a signal by patching it or by setting it to the maximum, and that applies to the CV inputs as well. This is one of our combo pot style inputs where with nothing patched, it works like a knob, a parameter control, and when you patch something into it, it becomes an attenuator for that input, that CV input. Now, by cranking this level input, it's possible to drive the filter a little harder, and I'm not going to say that it distorts because it is kind of hard to make it distort. You really need the peaks to be kind of close together, and because all those peaks are being summed, especially when you're running at mono and you have all 4 cores coming out of one output, if your peaks are close together and they're all being summed together, you can definitely approach the 20 volt peak to peak range, and you get clipping The resonance mostly will begin to clip. Oh, a noise generator. Well, we do have the telharmonic noise generator. Yeah, right, yeah. We have that one. This, I mean, to be honest, I'm a firm believer within modular of distorting a signal in ways that are not, when we think of distortion, we think of fuzz space, tube screamers, distortion boxes. But you can achieve quite a bit of distortion with audio rate modulation, especially with something like this second tick-tick input. You get something pretty... It can get pretty nasty, and especially if you tune your oscillator so that it's not at like a nice integer pitch of the sound coming in, it can get quite a bit of dissonance. Turn up that Q. It goes from being a nice sounding filter to something not so nice pretty quick. Yeah, it almost starts to sound like that. Yeah, and so because it's not just it's modulating a bunch of different things inside the circuit, and it ends up definitely doing something similar to that. You can create sidebands essentially in multiple places, not just in the cutoff. Well, there's 4 cutoffs that you're creating sidebands, but also in other parts of the circuit, such as the Q and other things that are happening there. So you end up with something pretty distorted sounding. I'm a pretty big fan of that. Ring modulators are great for creating distortion. Actually, just straight up amplitude modulation. If you have a really aggressive signal to provide that modulation, it can impart a lot of those harmonics on the carrier signal, and you get something that's I guess a more advanced form of distortion almost. And because these are synthesizers, and we're mostly in control of them, you can do things like that. With stuff like guitars or a drum set, you're sort of at the mercy of acoustics. An acoustic drum set has all sorts of things that it does that are hard to control. It just does them, and so you can control all of that and create distortions in ways that are maybe different than a guitar distortion pedal. Any other questions? No more questions. Whoa, that was a fantastic demo I gave. Wow. No. Whoa, wait. One more question. When's the raffle? Woo! Did you hear about the free pizza? All right, free pizza didn't satisfy. We've got a raffle to do. I don't know anything about the raffle though, so.
Some of you all have raffle tickets. We're gonna do a combo because we have some T-shirts and some hoodies, and then we have one maps available to a lucky winner. But we're gonna do a combo raffle T-shirt toss. The rule
T-shirt toss.
T-shirt toss is if you don't get your size, then you just give it to somebody else. And you're the lucky one next to you. And we'll also raffle some T-shirts, and then maybe you'll get to pick your size. All right.
T-shirt toss needs music, right? This doesn't sound like T-shirt toss music. Maybe. I'm still tweaking the...
534723. Woo! Awesome. Come on.
Whoa. This is a big one. Large. Got any larges out there? Let's see what this one is. Size NL. Not large. No, it's large. Whoa. Is anybody cold? A hoodie. New Renee touchpad shirt. You don't have to lick it. You can just put it on. See, size XL. Any XLs in the house? If you get more than one, give it to someone who doesn't have one. More larges. Another number.
All right, we've got 534783. 5344794.
Oh, hey. This is a double toss. Whoever gets it has to toss it behind them, okay? Because there's people in the very back. Let's see, let's see. Large. Someone way back there. Ah! I'm trying to get the guy by the exit sign. Medium hoodie. He got a t-shirt. Whoa, cool posters. This is a lot of t-shirts to toss. gotta. Is there anybody in the back that? Medium hoodies. Medium hoodie for you. Medium hoodies. I've got it. People in the front have been getting a lot, so sorry about that. This one, Renee hoodie, size medium? Medium? Yeah, all right, you convinced me. The kid's not happy. She won nothing.
716-534.
Pick a poster. Posters silk screened at image 420. No, where were these silk? Actually, they weren't. They weren't done at image 420. The T-shirts were done at image 420, right next door to Make Noise in Asheville, North Carolina.
All right, 534-768-823. 534-823. We're gonna give you a poster. Stand by. 534-719. All posters. Pick whichever one
Wow. It's a free-for-all. Is all the pizza gone? Man. Whoa, they were saying you left. I think they were just trying to. Man, you think you know your friends. What? Bryce won! Bryce! Sorry, we don't have any patches. Bryce, since you just won a shirt, you also get to toss a shirt. Get it in the back. That was fantastic. Bryce is very good at tossing T-shirts. Size medium. Oh, man, this is hard. Bryce, I need you to toss this shirt too. Keep in mind, there's people up front that want it too.